I was in the middle of debugging a particularly nasty piece of back-end code when my phone buzzed with a notification from my credit card company. I glanced at it, barely paying attention at first, assuming it was the usual subscription charge or coffee run. But the number made my stomach clench, $10,750. My fingers froze above the keyboard. The merchant was listed as Pacific Horizon Cruises. I read it again, out loud this time, as if that would make it make more sense. I hadn't booked any cruise. I hadn't even taken a vacation in over 2 years. My hands went cold and my mouth was suddenly dry. I clicked into my banking app, heart racing, and stared at the pending transaction. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a glitch. My credit card had just been used to pay for a luxury cruise I knew absolutely nothing about. My first instinct was panic. Not just a jolt of worry, but a deep, crawling nausea that twisted through my stomach like ice water. I called the card company immediately. While I was on hold, I tried to steady my breathing, trying not to imagine some stranger out there draining my finances, stealing my identity, flying across the ocean with my money. The hold music was irritatingly cheerful, clashing against the rising dread in my chest. When the rep finally picked up, I launched into an explanation, stumbling over my words, desperate to report the fraud before more charges hit. But before she could even begin a fraud report, she asked a question that made everything spiral in a completely different direction. Can you confirm the names on the booking? The reservation was made under Linda and Emily Reynolds. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. My brain couldn't compute what I'd just heard. Linda and Emily Reynolds. My mother and my younger sister. My own family. I think I whispered, "What?" but my ears were ringing too loudly to be sure. I ended the call without finishing the report. My hands were shaking as I switched over to my messages and called my mom. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright, like everything was completely normal. "Hi honey, everything okay?" I didn't even greet her. "Did you use my credit card to book a cruise?" There was a pause. Not hesitation, just the kind of silence that meant she wasn't going to lie about it, just decide how to frame it. "Oh, that," she said, like I'd asked her if she'd borrowed my scarf. "Yes. We're going to the Caribbean next week. I didn't think you'd mind. You don't need the money anyway." I think I laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't feel anything like humor. I thought maybe I'd misheard her. "You spent over $10,000 on my credit card," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "Without asking. And you didn't think I'd mind?" "Well," she said, with that tone she always used when she was about to say something condescending, "you make more than your father and I ever did. And it's not like you're married or have kids to support. It's just sitting there. Why shouldn't it go towards something that benefits the family?" My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear her. I felt like I'd been punched. Not because it was the first time she'd taken something from me, that had started back in college, when she'd borrowed the refund from my student loan to pay for new tires and never paid it back. Or the time she'd pressured me to co-sign on a loan for Emily's community college tuition, even though Emily dropped out after 2 semesters to work part-time at a yoga studio. There was the time she'd used my name to get a better internet rate for their house. The times she'd called me selfish when I said I couldn't afford to help them with a remodel. But this was different. This wasn't a desperate emergency. This was a vacation. This was luxury. I asked her how she even got access to my card, and she sounded almost offended. "You gave me that number when we bought your father's anniversary gift, remember? And I saved it. Just in case. I figured if you were really that bothered, you'd have changed it by now." My jaw clenched. That had been nearly a year ago. A $200 watch. I hadn't even realized she still had the number. My own mother had been sitting on my card information, waiting for a moment she decided I wouldn't miss it. Or worse, waiting for a moment she simply didn't care if I did. I didn't even know what to say. My brain was spinning, flipping through all the years of gaslighting, guilt-tripping, emotional blackmail masquerading as "we're family, we help each other." How many times had I paid for Emily's therapy sessions? Covered utilities when their heating bills skyrocketed? Paid off the remaining balance on their car loan because my dad's pension was short that month? I told myself I was being generous, that I was lucky to be in a position to help. That was what good daughters did. But this wasn't help. This wasn't a request. This was theft, and the fact that she saw it as a favor made it so much worse. I'm reporting the charge as unauthorized, I said, my voice low, shaking with fury. You had no right. Oh, Megan, don't be dramatic. We've already packed. The cancellation fees are outrageous. You're seriously going to ruin this trip over a little misunderstanding? A little misunderstanding. She hung up on me when I said I'd be calling the bank again. When I tried calling back, she didn't pick up. Neither did my father. Emily sent me a text a few hours later that simply said, "Wow. Way to make everything about you." Again. I stared at it for a long time. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to convince myself that if I just gave enough, supported enough, bent myself into enough shapes, they'd see me as something other than a walking wallet. I wasn't angry about the money. I was angry that it proved what I'd been trying not to admit for years. That they saw me not as a person, but as a resource. That my accomplishments weren't mine, they were theirs, to benefit from however they pleased. And that any boundary I tried to set was treated as betrayal. I canceled the card that night. Called the cruise line and gave them a fraud report. They tried to talk me into letting the charge stand for the sake of the relationship, but I refused. The bank said it would take a few days to reverse the transaction. I locked down all my other accounts, changed passwords, removed any digital traces she might still have access to. It felt like cutting off a limb. And yet, in the back of my mind, a new sensation began to settle. Not guilt. Not panic. Just cold, clear certainty. Something had finally broken. Something that should have broken years ago. After I canceled the cruise charge and blocked my mother's number, I sat alone in my condo for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, letting the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the city traffic outside fill the space where my thoughts used to be. I couldn't even begin to process the betrayal, not yet. What came instead was the dull, heavy weight of exhaustion that I hadn't let myself feel for years. My body felt like it had finally caught up to everything I'd been suppressing. I was only 25, but I felt ancient. People always told me I was ahead of the curve. I graduated early, started working full-time at 21 as a junior developer, and by 22, I'd already bought my first home, a modest two-bedroom in a quieter part of the city, nothing extravagant, but solid, dependable, mine. That house was supposed to be an investment, something I could hold on to while the neighborhood grew and prices climbed. But less than 6 months after I closed on it, my mom called me crying. The story was long and complicated, like most of her stories, wrapped in a mix of guilt and manipulation. Something about Dad's hours being cut, Emily needing to reset emotionally after her latest crisis, and how their landlord was raising the rent again. I don't even remember saying yes. I just remember them moving in, my mom setting her potted plants on the windowsill, my dad hanging his jacket in the hallway closet, Emily dumping her suitcase on the bedroom floor like she had every right to be there. They were only supposed to stay for a few months. That's what I told myself. That's what they said. Just until they got back on their feet. But a few months turned into a year, and then 2, and then the idea of them leaving was something no one even brought up anymore. They never paid rent. Not once. I covered the mortgage, the property taxes, the water and electric bills, internet, maintenance, pest control, new appliances when the fridge broke, a new furnace last winter because the old one finally gave out during a cold snap. I paid for it all. Quietly. Without complaint. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was what family did. But as the months passed, what I started to notice, or what I started to admit, was how little they appreciated any of it. My dad, who hadn't held steady work in years, would call me every couple of weeks to ask for a little more to cover some repair or bill he forgot to mention. My mom treated the house like it was her own, rearranging furniture, repainting rooms without telling me, once even changing the locks for security and forgetting to give me a spare. When I gently reminded her I owned the house, she laughed and said, "You don't even live here, Megan, what do you care?" Emily took it further, turning the second bedroom into what she called her creative healing space, which meant covering every surface in thrift store crystals, incense, old art supplies, and half-finished vision boards. She hadn't had a job in over a year. Her last one was some seasonal thing at a boutique that she quit after 2 months because the fluorescent lighting gave her migraines. That was also around the time she broke up with her boyfriend, a guy she'd been dating for less than 6 months, and fell into what she described as a deep soul fatigue. For 12 solid months, she stayed in that house, scrolling on her phone, posting vague, moody Instagram stories about energy vampires and the toxic culture of grind mentality, while I went to work every day and sent the payments that kept a roof over all of their heads. The only time she seemed to have any energy at all was when she was asking for more money. Once, she texted me asking for $800 to replenish her aura at a spiritual retreat upstate. When I asked if she was serious, she replied with a passive-aggressive quote about how money flows easiest through open-hearted channels. I'd poured more than $60,000 into keeping that second house running. I knew the number because I'd started tracking it this past spring, when I caught myself hesitating before buying a $9 smoothie after a workout. I stood there in front of the counter, debating whether I could afford the splurge, and something inside me just cracked. That night, I sat down and opened every bank statement, every bill, every transaction tied to that house, and I added it up. Mortgage, utilities, repairs, supplies, the new washer and dryer set, the landscaping service I hired last summer because my dad said the weeds were hurting his allergies but never once pulled them himself. $60,000. Enough for a down payment on another property. Enough to pay off half my student loans. Enough to travel for a year, live comfortably, breathe. And I'd given it all to people who didn't even say thank you. My parents acted like I owed them. Like it was my duty to support them because I had a good job and no kids. They never asked what I needed. They never asked how I was doing. When I got promoted last year and told them over dinner, my mom's first question was, "Does that mean you can finally help us fix the fence?" Emily didn't even look up from her phone. The worst part is, for the longest time, I thought this was normal. I thought this was just how families worked. I told myself I was lucky, that I had the means to help them, that I could shoulder it, that it made me a good daughter, a good sister. But now, looking back, I see it for what it was. I was being drained. I was the only one pouring anything into this family, and they weren't even pretending to pour anything back. They used my love, my guilt, my success. They used my name, my credit, my money. And when I said no, when I finally pushed back, when I canceled that cruise and closed the accounts they'd leached off for years, they looked at me like I was the villain. I wasn't heartbroken. Not really. Not anymore. Just empty. Just tired. Just done. Sometimes I wonder when exactly I became the designated caretaker of everyone else's life. I try to trace it back to some clear moment, something I could point to and say, that's when it started, but the truth is, it was always like this. From the moment I could understand language, I knew what was expected of me. I was the responsible one. The one who didn't need reminding. The one who could be trusted to manage herself. My parents used to brag about me in public, how I was reading chapter books before kindergarten, how I always said please and thank you, how I kept my room clean without being asked. But behind closed doors, all that praise became currency. It bought me silence, expectations, and sacrifice. Emily was always the sensitive one. That was the word they used like a shield around her, like an excuse for everything. She was delicate. She had big emotions. When she threw tantrums at age 10, screamed and slammed doors and broke things, my mother would stroke her hair and say, "She just feels things more deeply than most." When I got upset, when I cried after being blamed for something she did, I was told I was being dramatic. Overreacting. Being selfish. The rules were different for us from the beginning. I remember being in middle school and wanting to join band so badly. I had picked up the flute at a school workshop, and for the first time, something felt like mine. I practiced constantly, even saved up part of my babysitting money for sheet music. But when it came time to register, my mother told me no, Emily had just started dance classes, and the studio was a real investment, and we couldn't afford both. I was 12. I gave up band without arguing. I told myself maybe next year, maybe later. But there was never a later. Emily danced for years. She didn't even like it that much. I was 14 when my parents dipped into the college savings fund they had set up under my name. They didn't tell me. I found out when I applied for a financial aid package and the numbers didn't add up. I confronted them, confused, thinking there must be some mistake, and my dad sat me down with that tired look he always used when he wanted to make me feel like a burden. He told me they had to use part of the fund to buy Emily a car so she could commute to her after-school program and therapy. "She's having a hard time," he said. "You know that." I was 14. I didn't even have a learner's permit yet. But I nodded and said it was okay. Because that was my role. Throughout high school, I did everything right. I kept my grades up, worked weekends at a bookstore, won scholarships, volunteered because my mother said it would look good on my college applications. I studied in the car while waiting to pick Emily up from appointments. I cooked dinner when they were tired. I got so used to being helpful that it stopped feeling like something I could choose. It was just what I did. What I was supposed to do. I didn't drink, didn't party, didn't even date much. I didn't have time. I was too busy holding everything together. When Emily dropped out of college after her first year, citing anxiety and a toxic roommate, my parents barely blinked. They let her come home, gave her time to rest, talked about how proud they were that she was listening to her mental health. When I asked if they would still help with my tuition, my mother sighed and said, "We can't do everything, Megan. You're so capable, you'll figure it out." I did. I picked up a second job at a diner on weekends and worked as a lab assistant during the week. I slept 4 hours a night. I kept up my GPA because I couldn't afford to lose my scholarship. I graduated with no debt, no help, and no applause. And still, when I visited home, when I brought news of my job offers and raises, my mother would smile politely and say, "Well, you've always had it easy." As if nothing I'd done required effort. As if Emily was the one who had struggled, and I was just gliding through life on pure luck. Every time I shared a milestone, buying my condo, getting promoted, launching a project, she would nod and then pivot the conversation to Emily. "Your sister's still finding herself. She's very intuitive, you know. She might open a wellness blog." My success was a threat to the fragile narrative they had built around our family. That I was lucky. That Emily was struggling. That everything I did came easily and everything she didn't do was due to forces beyond her control. If I acknowledged how hard I had worked, it would expose how little they had done for me. And so, the harder I worked, the more they minimized it. I was supposed to give without asking for anything. Be proud but never too proud. I wasn't allowed to want recognition. That would be ungrateful. What stung most was that I had internalized it all. For years, I believed them. I believed I was just naturally efficient, that it didn't really cost me anything to take on more, to give more, to stretch myself thinner. I thought being the good daughter meant always saying yes. I thought love meant sacrifice, and that being needed was the same as being loved. It took me years, decades, to realize that they never once made Emily feel guilty for falling apart. But they made me feel guilty every time I succeeded. I confronted her the morning after the charge posted, after a long, sleepless night of staring at the ceiling and rehearsing what I'd say. I wasn't angry in the way she expected, I wasn't yelling or crying. I was calm. Cold, even. Detached in a way that seemed to disturb her more than if I'd screamed. I called her and didn't wait for pleasantries. "You stole from me," I said, clearly and plainly. "You used my credit card without permission. That's theft. And fraud." She laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd just accused her of borrowing a sweater without asking. "Oh Megan, don't be ridiculous. It's family. We share things. You act like I'm a stranger off the street." Her tone was dismissive, light, like this was some silly overreaction, something I'd laugh about later. I didn't say anything. I just let the silence stretch. She hates that. She always has. I think she expected me to argue, to launch into one of our old scripts, where she guilt trips and I back down, but I said nothing. Eventually, she filled the gap. "You really need to check that tone, young lady. After all we've done for you, this is the thanks we get?" That line, asterisk after all we've done for you asterisk, I'd heard it 1,000 times in 1,000 different forms. Every time I set a boundary. Every time I said no. Every time I dared to acknowledge how much I was giving compared to how little I received. It always circled back to guilt. "We supported you your whole life," she continued, the tone shifting now, sweetened with that manufactured disappointment she was so good at. "Your father worked his back into ruin so you could have the opportunities you've had. And I've sacrificed everything to keep this family together. And now you're upset over what? A vacation? You used my card for over $10,000, I said flatly. Without telling me. Without asking. That's not family. That's stealing. Oh, for God's sake, she snapped. It's not like we're strangers. And we're not spending it on junk. It's a trip, Megan. You'd know what that feels like if you ever took time off and stopped working like a robot. I could almost see her rolling her eyes on the other end of the call. She never liked how I worked, how I planned, how I built structure around things. It made her uncomfortable, as if responsibility was a performance I put on to make her feel inferior. It wasn't. It was survival. Something I built brick by brick while they leaned on me harder every year. Then she added, almost offhandedly, anyway, we'll be gone for 11 days. The ship leaves next Thursday. Emily's thrilled, it's just what she needs after the year she's had. Poor thing. I didn't respond. I just stared at the floor of my kitchen, one hand resting on the back of a chair, the other holding the phone like it was physically hot. She kept talking, but I wasn't really listening. Something about shore excursions and tropical drinks and how Emily might meet someone on board. I wasn't hearing her. I was watching the way my mind suddenly, cleanly, fell into place. 11 days. That was what she said. 11 full days. I repeated it quietly to myself, not as a question, not as a plan, just as a fact. Like a light switch flipping on. She was still going on when I finally said, I've reported the charge. The cruise line knows it was unauthorized. They might cancel the reservation. Her silence was instant and sharp. You didn't, she said slowly. Then she laughed again, but it was thinner now. Megan. That's childish. Vindictive, even. Do you really want to ruin your sister's one chance at some peace? You know how hard it's been on her. And your father, his back's been acting up again. This cruise could help us reconnect, recharge. We've been through so much. You really want to take that away over money? Her voice was sugar-coated poison. Every sentence a hook. Every word meant to twist the focus away from what she had done and shift it back to me, my selfishness, my coldness, my failure to be the good daughter she raised. I knew these tactics by heart. Guilt, then pity. Then moral superiority. They were as familiar as breathing. You've always been so rigid, she continued, softer now. So judgmental. So quick to make everything about control. But maybe if you looked in the mirror once in a while, you'd see that not everyone can be like you. Some of us struggle. Some of us don't have your privileges. You've never really understood how much we gave up for you, Megan. What did they give up for me, I thought. What, exactly? I had sacrificed band, scholarships, my savings. I had worked 2 jobs through college while Emily slept until noon and blamed bad vibes for not submitting job applications. I had paid for their roof, their bills, their groceries, their broken plumbing and mold remediation and Emily's therapy co-pays. I had used my 20s to hold up a family that had never once offered to lift me. The cruise charge wasn't a mistake. It was a culmination. A crescendo of all the years they had taken and taken and taken while calling it love. They had stolen from me before, just in smaller, quieter ways. This time, it was loud. This time, it left a paper trail. And for the first time, I was done pretending it was anything but what it was. She kept talking after I hung up. I could see the dots still bouncing in our text thread as she typed a follow-up message. But I didn't open it. I just stared at the wall in front of me, and I thought about that number again. 11 days. 11 days without them in the house. 11 days with an empty space. 11 days to breathe. 11 days to think. 11 days to make a decision. I sat on the couch in my condo, knees tucked up to my chest, the glow of my phone screen casting a pale light in the dark room. The charge sat there, bold and undeniable, $10,750 from Pacific Horizon Cruises, but by now I wasn't looking at the number so much as what it represented. It wasn't just the money, it hadn't been about the money for a long time. It was about everything it stood for. The years of silent sacrifice, of being siphoned dry under the guise of obligation, of being told I was selfish for setting limits, cruel for asking to be treated like a human being with boundaries. That number was the sum total of what it meant to be their daughter, unending access to me, to my time, my energy, my finances, and now, even my credit. The condo was quiet. No TV, no music, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant thump of someone's footsteps in the unit above. My own breathing sounded too loud in my ears, and I could feel the pressure building in my chest, not like a panic attack but like something sharper, cleaner. I hadn't cried. I didn't feel sad. What I felt was something colder, something steadier than anger, resolve. An understanding, so absolute and full, that it made my body still. For years I had told myself they would change. That if I just kept helping, kept giving, they would eventually see me as more than a resource. That they would, one day, meet me halfway. But they never had. And they never would. Because they didn't see what they were doing as wrong. They saw it as normal, expected, deserved. My mother had said it herself, it's family. We share things. But what she meant was, you give, we take. And I was done giving. I reached for my laptop, flipping it open without hesitation, my fingers already moving before I fully understood what I was doing. Muscle memory guided me as I pulled up my saved contacts, scrolled to Amanda's name, my real estate agent. She'd helped me buy both properties, the condo I lived in now and the house they lived in, the one I used to feel proud of until it became a monument to everything they drained from me. She had always been professional, sharp, and kind without being sentimental. I needed that kind of energy now. Someone efficient. Someone who didn't need the whole sob story to understand urgency. I clicked the compose button and started typing. Hi Amanda. Hope you're well. I've made the decision to sell the property on 48th Street. It's no longer working for me financially or personally. The house is currently occupied, but no one is on a lease, and I have full ownership. I'd like to move forward as soon as possible. They will be away from the property for 11 days starting next Thursday, and I would prefer to handle everything while it's vacant. Can we schedule a walkthrough during that window and get the ball rolling? I reread the email 3 times. Not because I was unsure, but because it felt surreal, almost ceremonial. Like a turning point being carved in real time. Every word felt like a quiet declaration of something I should have done years ago. I hovered over the send button for only a second. Then I clicked it. The moment the email sent, I felt something shift inside me, not a lightness, not relief exactly, but a quiet release of tension that had lived in my chest for over a decade. The house wasn't a home. Not anymore. Maybe it never had been. It was a place I bought out of hope, out of some desperate attempt to hold my family together by providing them with stability they'd never earned, and they'd used it like they used everything else. They'd never signed a lease. Never paid a cent of rent. Legally, they had no claim. No footing to argue. They were squatters with good furniture. And once they boarded that ship, once they were unreachable and sunbathing with drinks I had unknowingly paid for, I would begin the process of taking my life back, not with screaming matches or tearful conversations, not with begging for accountability or waiting for apologies that would never come. No, I would do it the only way they would understand, with action. With a locked door. With a for sale sign planted in a yard I had paid to landscape 3 times over. I didn't owe them a warning. They never asked for permission when they took from me. Why should I offer them the courtesy they'd never once extended in return? I closed the laptop slowly and set it aside. The silence of the room felt different now. Not oppressive. Not suffocating. Just still. It was the kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. For the first time in my adult life, I had drawn a line, and this time, I wasn't stepping back from it. Amanda replied within hours, always prompt, always crisp in her language. Her subject line read, sale of 48th Street property, confirming next steps. I opened the email with a strange mix of anticipation and detachment. She was surprised, she said, but entirely on board. She asked if everything was okay, just briefly, the professional equivalent of a polite knock before stepping into someone's mess. She didn't press, and I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The numbers were what mattered now. She confirmed that the market in that neighborhood was still hot, hotter than it had been when I bought the house 3 years ago, when I was fresh into my career and naive enough to think buying a second home for my parents would finally secure their pride in me. Amanda estimated we could list the house at $270,000, possibly more, especially if we marketed it as investor-friendly. It was in a desirable area for rentals, close to transit, recently updated plumbing and HVAC, thanks to me and my wallet. She attached a draft of the listing, clean and polished, and asked if I wanted to review staging options or list it as is. I stared at the screen for a long moment before I replied. I told her the house was occupied. That it was currently being used by my parents and my younger sister. That there was no lease, no rental agreement, no legal tenancy of any kind. Just a verbal understanding that had rotted into something parasitic. I expected her to pause or suggest we wait. But she didn't flinch. She said that in situations like this, it's legally simple. Once the sale closes, the new owner has the right to issue notice to vacate. No lease meant no protection for the occupants. They'd be treated as month-to-month tenants, subject to the standard 30-day notice period, and that would be up to the buyer, not me. She assured me there would be interest from cash buyers who wouldn't blink at a property that needed to be cleared. Some even preferred it. Less emotion, fewer negotiations. It was legally clean. I felt that word sink into me, clean. For the first time in years, the idea of doing something with finality, without the weight of emotional fallout or endless explanations, felt like oxygen. Amanda asked if I wanted to proceed with pre-listing prep the following week. I typed back yes. Proceed and hit send without hesitation. I closed the tab and sat back, letting the screen dim on its own. My hands were cold. Not from fear, not from nerves, something else. Something deeper. It was like watching myself from the outside, like watching a version of me being unzipped and discarded on the floor while a new one stood up in its place. I wasn't just making a financial decision. I wasn't just selling a house. I was burning down a role I had played my entire life. For years, I had been the enabler. The fixer. The one who stepped in. Who made things work. Who said yes, when I wanted to say no. Who turned myself into a safety net for people who never once looked down to see if I was fraying. I paid their bills, housed their failings, swallowed their guilt trips like medicine. I thought being dependable was the same as being loved. I thought they would see the effort. They never did. But now, something was different. I wasn't acting from guilt or from love or from some desperate hope that they'd finally turn around and thank me. I was acting from clarity. From anger, not the wild, explosive kind, but the precise, quiet fury of someone who spent years being told she had no right to feel used. I wasn't their daughter in this moment. I wasn't a sister. I wasn't the background character in someone else's melodrama. I was the owner. The seller. The one with the deed, the email thread, the signatures, the title. The one who got to decide what happened next. The house had never truly been mine, not emotionally. It was always theirs. A gift that turned into an expectation. A symbol of how much I was willing to give and how little they were willing to respect it. But now, as Amanda scheduled the walkthrough and ordered the market photos, it finally began to feel like something else, something I owned not just legally, but fully. Something I could reclaim. I imagined the key in my hand, heavy and real. I imagined walking through that front door, not to visit, not to placate, but to take stock. To look at the stained carpets and half-fixed cabinets and old furniture that I had paid for piece by piece, and to decide what stayed and what went. To see the house not as a burden or a loss, but as a space to be emptied. I wasn't afraid of their reaction anymore. Let them rage. Let them cry. Let them play the victims like they always had. They had made a home out of my silence, but I had finally stopped being quiet. This was no longer about fairness or forgiveness or what a good daughter would do. This was about what I was no longer willing to tolerate. What I was no longer willing to fund. The house was going on the market. And this time, I wasn't asking anyone's permission. The offer came in early Thursday morning, just 4 days after Amanda had listed the house. Her email was short, direct, and almost clinical in its tone, which I appreciated. An investor named Todd had submitted a cash offer, $265,000 with no contingencies and a closing window of 7 days. He wasn't interested in walkthroughs, emotional negotiations, or family history. He wasn't going to ask about who lived there, how long they'd been there, or why they weren't paying rent. He just wanted the property, fast and clean. It was exactly what I wanted too. I stared at the number for a moment, letting it settle. It wasn't the highest possible price we could have squeezed from the market, but it was fair, solid, and immediate. I didn't hesitate. I opened a new tab, drafted a quick reply to Amanda, and typed a single word, accepted. Within minutes, she sent me the full set of documents to sign through a secure portal. There was no ceremony, no formal meeting, just a sleek interface, highlighted fields, and the soft clicks of my trackpad guiding me from one digital signature to the next. I sat in silence as I reviewed each page, my condo lit only by the soft glow of my laptop screen. The air around me was still, the kind of stillness that comes not from emptiness but from resolution. Each time I clicked to sign, on the purchase agreement, the title transfer, the disclosures, I felt something uncoil inside of me, something that had been wound tight for too long. There was no second guessing, no flash of guilt or fear, just a calm certainty that this was exactly what needed to happen. I didn't pause to imagine their reaction. I didn't let myself spiral into what-ifs. I just kept clicking, signing, moving forward. Halfway through the process, my phone buzzed next to me on the table. Without thinking, I picked it up. A new message from Emily. I didn't even need to open it to know what it was. Part of me almost laughed. I unlocked the screen, and sure enough, there it was, a photo of her stretched out on a cruise chair, tan legs crossed, a bright drink in one hand, the turquoise ocean in the background. The caption read, "Living my best life." In the past, that would have enraged me. I would have felt that deep, bitter sting in my chest, the one that always came when she flaunted luxury bought with my exhaustion. But now? Nothing. No heat, no tightness, no urge to scream into a pillow. Just quiet. I didn't respond. I didn't save the photo. I didn't even feel the need to roll my eyes. I put the phone back down, turned back to the laptop, and resumed signing the final few documents. When the last field was filled and the system prompted me with a final confirmation, "Thank you for completing your documents," I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The house was sold. The legal transfer had begun. There was nothing left to discuss. No more room for manipulation or guilt or obligation. By this time next week, the house would belong to someone else, and whatever grip they thought they had on me would be broken, legally, financially, completely. They didn't know yet. They were still somewhere out at sea, drinking on my dime, lounging under skies I had unknowingly paid for, floating in luxury while I unmade the foundation they stood on. They wouldn't understand what had happened until they returned. By then, it would be too late. The locks would be changed. The utility accounts closed. A formal notice from the new owner would be waiting in the mailbox, informing them of the change in ownership and giving them 30 days to leave. They would be confused, then furious, and maybe they'd call me, maybe they'd scream, maybe they'd beg, but none of it would matter. Because they were no longer my responsibility. Because that house was no longer theirs to occupy. Because I had finally chosen myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't drowning in guilt or trying to justify my choices to people who never cared to understand them. I felt peace, real, whole, undisturbed peace. Not relief, not triumph, just stillness. The kind of peace that comes from doing what should have been done a long time ago. I didn't feel like a daughter in that moment. I didn't feel like the family fixer, the ATM, the fallback plan. I felt like a person who had drawn a boundary and meant it. I felt like someone who had finally remembered that her life belonged to her. The day before their cruise was set to end, I powered off my phone. Not silenced it. Not muted notifications or set it to do not disturb. I held the button down until the screen went black, until there was nothing. No buzzing. No messages. No way for anyone to reach me. The house sale had gone through 2 days prior. The funds were in my account. The locks had already been changed by a contractor Amanda recommended, a quiet man who didn't ask questions when I gave him the address and a key. A 30-day notice to vacate had been posted on the front door in clear, legal language, signed by the new owner. The utilities were already scheduled to be shut off in stages. Everything was done. There was nothing left to explain. No more conversations to be had. No more expectations for me to justify, or manage, or absorb. I spent the weekend in complete silence. I let the morning light wake me up naturally instead of an alarm. I made myself a real breakfast for the first time in weeks, fresh eggs, buttered toast, hot coffee that I drank slowly instead of rushing between meetings or calls. I walked through my condo barefoot, every room filled with the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just calm. I took a nap in the middle of the afternoon because I could. I opened a book, not for distraction, but because I wanted to, and I actually read the pages instead of scanning them with a restless mind. The peace didn't feel like a reward. It felt like recovery. Like a part of me had finally gone still after years of tensing for impact. I didn't wonder where they were or what they were doing. I didn't picture them in the airport or on the last day of the cruise, dragging their luggage down sun-warmed ramps, still glowing from days of luxury they never paid for. I didn't think about what their faces would look like when they pulled up to the house and found the locks didn't work. I didn't imagine the moment they saw the letter taped to the door. I didn't let any of it in. That wasn't my story to live anymore. When I finally turned my phone back on Sunday evening, it didn't even finish booting up before the alerts began. 25 missed calls. Multiple voicemails. Dozens of text messages, some just blank bubbles, some filled with question marks, some with messages so long they were broken up into chunks. I didn't open the texts. I started with the voicemails. The first was from my mother, her voice brittle but trying to sound composed. "Megan, what is this? We can't get in. The locks aren't working. Call me back immediately." The next message, a few hours later, was colder. Her tone had shifted into that familiar mix of disbelief and accusation, like she couldn't decide if she was more offended or shocked. "We saw the notice. I can't believe you'd go behind our backs like this. After everything we've done for you. This is how you treat your family. Unbelievable." Her voice was sharp, clipped, like she was trying not to scream in public. The third voicemail was from Emily, and her tone was hysterical from the start. "Megan, what the FK? What is happening? We're locked out. Are you serious right now? You sold the house? Where are we supposed to go? I don't even have a jacket with me. Oh my God, I'm literally homeless, are you happy now?" She was crying. Full sobs, gasping for breath between accusations. But not once did she say the words I had waited to hear for so long. Not a single apology. Not from her. Not from my mother. Not from my father, who left one message 2 days later, trying to sound like a mediator, but still managed to slip in the phrase, "You blindsided us, and your mother is devastated." Not one of them said they were sorry for stealing from me. Not one of them acknowledged what they had taken. Not the money. Not the years. Not the peace. Every message was about what I had done to them, never about what they had done to me. And that silence that was louder than all the crying and screaming and outrage combined. I didn't call them back. I sat with the phone in my lap, watching the flood of messages slow to a trickle. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel anything at all except confirmation. This was always how it was going to be. I could have given them another year, another $10,000, another 10 chances, and it still would have ended like this, me empty, them demanding more. This time, I didn't give them that chance. I turned the phone off again, placed it face down on the table, and stood up. I walked into my bedroom and opened the windows wide, letting in the cold night air. It smelled clean. Like rain. Like endings. Like something I could finally breathe in without choking. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hand and went through each voicemail, one after another, not rushing, not skipping, just listening. 23 messages, each one a different shape of the same thing: shock, outrage, manipulation, disbelief, guilt, entitlement. My mother's voice, sharp and cold one moment, then weeping the next, asking how I could do this to her. Emily's voice breaking into sobs, claiming she had nowhere to go, that I had ruined her life. My father's tone, the weakest of the three, carrying that familiar weight of passive disappointment, like he had nothing to do with any of this but still expected me to fix it. I felt nothing. No tightness in my chest, no tremble in my fingers. Their voices were familiar, but distant now. Background noise. I had heard every variation of these emotions before, when I said no, when I asked for space, when I hesitated to give more than I already had. The volume had changed, the stakes had changed, but the script hadn't. They weren't upset about the house. They were upset they no longer had control. I sat in silence for a while after the last message ended. The apartment was still, the light outside dimming into that soft, muted blue of early evening. I opened the message app and typed slowly, carefully. Not from impulse, not from anger. I had waited to be calm before responding, and now I was. I sent one message. Just one. You chose to use my credit card without permission. I chose to sell my property. Both were choices. Both have consequences. I didn't add anything. No explanation, no defense, no softness to make it easier to hear. I read it once, twice, and hit send. Then I opened my contacts, started with my mother, and hit block. Her number, her text thread, her email, her social accounts. Then my father. Then Emily. Each name followed by the same final action: block, remove, silence. One by one, I cut the lines they had always used to reach into my life and pull. Their hands were always in my space, my money, my mind. This time, I didn't just say no, I closed the door. Locked it. Walked away. I deleted the threads, the voicemails, the history. Not in rage, not in grief, just in completion. There was nothing left to keep. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of all the space I had never been allowed to have. It didn't echo. It settled around me like a blanket I hadn't realized I'd been missing. For the first time in my adult life, no one could reach me. Not to ask for money. Not to accuse me. Not to call me heartless, selfish, cruel, dramatic. For the first time, I was unreachable. And it was bliss. It was 3 days after I blocked them when the pounding started. I was in the kitchen, making tea, the kettle just beginning to hiss with heat when I heard the sound, sharp, insistent, brutal. Fist against wood. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. The rhythm of the knocking, the volume, the rising pitch of the voice that followed, it was my mother. "Megan," she screamed, her voice shrill and ragged with fury. "Megan, open this door. I know you're in there. Don't you dare ignore me. You think you can do this to us and then hide?" Her voice echoed down the hallway, furious and unfiltered, the kind of screaming that doesn't care who's listening. I stood completely still, unmoving, hands wrapped around the kitchen counter, heart steady. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I just waited. Then came Emily's voice, softer but frantic, broken with tears. "Meg, please. Please just talk to us. I don't understand. Why would you do this? We don't have anywhere to go. Just, please open the door." She was crying, hard enough that her voice cracked. I closed my eyes and focused on the sound of the kettle, louder now, the steam rising, the water ready. I didn't open the door. I didn't say a word. I poured my tea and sat down at the table, letting the sounds from the hallway fade into the background like a distant storm. The yelling continued for another 5 minutes, then stopped. Silence fell. Then footsteps. Then nothing. When I opened the door an hour later to check if they had really left, the hallway was empty, but something was on the floor, a single folded piece of paper, slid under my door. My name was written on the outside in my mother's handwriting, hurried, the ink slightly smudged. I picked it up without emotion, carried it back inside, and unfolded it at the kitchen table. It was handwritten, 2 pages in looping cursive that she always used when she wanted to sound tender and composed. The tone of the letter veered wildly, starting with wounded confusion, shifting to moral outrage, then settling into carefully constructed guilt. She wrote about betrayal. About how I had abandoned them when they were most vulnerable. How I had thrown my own family into a motel. She underlined that part twice. "Is that what you wanted, Megan?" she wrote, as if I had been waiting for an opportunity to inflict pain. As if all of this, the sale, the silence, the block, was cruelty, not consequence. She mentioned how hard it had been for them, how tired she was, how Emily hadn't stopped crying in days. She described the motel room in detail, the broken lamp, the stained carpet, the thin towels. Every sentence built to one thing: blame. She never mentioned the money. Never mentioned the credit card or the cruise or the 2 years they had lived in my house for free. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Only accusations framed in the language of suffering. I was the cause, and they were the collateral. I read the letter once, slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I didn't even feel the familiar pang of shame they always counted on. I folded the letter back along its original creases, walked into my bedroom, and slipped it into the manila folder I had started weeks ago, labeled clearly in black ink, documentation. It sat alongside printed bank statements, screenshots of texts, a copy of the sale agreement, and a file of legal notes Amanda had sent me. I added it not because I needed more proof, but because I wanted the record to be complete. Then I made another cup of tea and went back to my weekend. The quiet returned. And this time, I let it in without resistance. The letter arrived in a stiff white envelope, tucked into my mailbox between a grocery flyer and a credit card offer. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, the return address printed in block letters like it wanted to be taken seriously. I knew what it was before I even opened it. The weight of it, the timing, the inevitability of their next move, it all tracked. Inside was a printed letter on formal letterhead, several pages long, heavy on legalese but light on actual substance. The language was threatening, dramatic, and almost theatrical in tone. According to them, I had committed an unlawful and retaliatory eviction and caused significant emotional and financial harm to my family. The firm claimed they were seeking $100,000 in damages. There was no citation of a lease agreement, no mention of any formal tenancy, no reference to any documentation that would give their case even the thinnest layer of credibility. Just bold accusations and vague language meant to intimidate. At the bottom, it asked for a response within 10 business days to avoid escalation. I read the letter twice, front to back. Then I placed it on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and called my attorney. He had helped with the final steps of the sale, double-checking that the legal notices and postings were properly delivered and filed. When I told him about the letter, he asked me to scan and email it over. 20 minutes later, he called me back laughing, not cruelly, not mockingly, but with the incredulous amusement of someone dealing with amateurs. He told me the letter was bluffing. No lease meant no tenancy. No tenancy meant no grounds for eviction, legal or illegal. The house had changed ownership. The notice had been properly served. Everything was by the book. He told me to do nothing. No response. No contact. No reaction. If anything came of it, they'd file a formal complaint, but he was willing to bet they wouldn't even bother. They didn't. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Nothing else arrived. No follow-up, no court filing, no process server at my door. The threads fizzled into silence just like everything else, bluster without follow-through, noise meant to scare me back into place. It didn't work. A few days later, I got a text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in over a year. We were never close, but she had always been the only one in the extended family who seemed to notice things, quiet, observant, careful with her words. She didn't ask questions. She just said, heard about everything. Just so you know, they're in an apartment now. Pretty rough one. Your dad finally filed for disability. Emily's staying there too. Not doing great. I read the message once and didn't reply. I didn't need to. It didn't bring me joy. It didn't bring me pain either. It was just information. Something I acknowledged and then let pass through me without sticking. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no victorious ending, no poetic justice, no dramatic collapse. Just the slow, inevitable fallout of choices they had made, decisions they had convinced themselves would never catch up to them. There were no apologies. No reconciliations. Just a growing distance that felt more and more like peace. I looked at the stack of mail on my kitchen counter, the letter still sitting there, now just another piece of paper among junk coupons and old receipts. I picked it up and slid it into the back of my documentation folder without another thought. And for the first time in my life, I felt free, not because they had fallen, but because I had stopped holding them up. I started therapy 2 weeks after the house sale closed, though if I'm honest, I had known for years that I needed it. I just never gave myself permission. I told myself I was too busy, too responsible, that I could handle things on my own. I had normalized the chaos, convinced myself that what I was carrying wasn't trauma, just life. It took silence, real, unbroken silence, for me to finally feel the weight of everything I had been holding. And once I felt it, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The first session was remote. I remember sitting at my desk, palms pressed against the warm ceramic of a coffee mug I didn't drink from, trying to find a way to explain everything without sounding ungrateful or dramatic. Years of conditioning had taught me to frame my pain as inconvenience, to soften the truth before I spoke it. But I made myself say it plainly. I told her about the house. About the credit card. About the cruise. But more than that, I told her about the years. The years of being the reliable one, the responsible one, the daughter who never said no, who paid without question, who kept everything stitched together while being picked apart from the inside. She listened without interrupting, nodding quietly, her face calm and unreadable. Then, when I finally stopped talking, she said, "What you've experienced isn't just family dysfunction. It's exploitation. And it didn't start with the house. That was just the point where you finally had enough." I felt those words hit like a cold rush of air. Not because they shocked me, but because they didn't. Deep down, I already knew. I had always known. I just needed someone else to say it without judgment, without trying to excuse it with phrases like, "That's just how family is." Week by week, we unpacked it all. My childhood, the way my accomplishments were dismissed, the way Emily was constantly coddled while I was held to standards no one else had to meet. We talked about the guilt I carried for not feeling close to them, the shame I felt every time I chose myself. I told her about the way my mother would cry when I said no, about the way my father would suddenly get quiet, disappointed, like my boundaries were acts of betrayal. I talked about how Emily could disappear for weeks, contribute nothing, lash out in rage, and still be seen as the one who needed protecting, while I was the one expected to pick up the slack. Through it all, my therapist kept guiding me back to the same question: who taught you that love is something you earn by suffering? I didn't have an answer. But I knew exactly who had benefited from me believing it. I started sleeping better. Slowly. At first, the silence in my condo felt strange, like something was missing. I wasn't used to having space that no one else could claim. I wasn't used to the absence of emergencies, of late-night texts, of the sick feeling in my stomach every time my phone buzzed. But eventually, that stillness became something I craved. I stopped pacing while I talked on the phone. I stopped apologizing when I said no. I stopped flinching when someone asked if I had a good relationship with my family. With the money from the house, every cent of it finally, fully mine, I did something I had never done before. I made plans without anyone else in mind. I paid off my student loans completely. I started a small investment portfolio with the help of a financial advisor who spoke to me like an equal, not like someone who needed rescuing. I set up a savings account that wasn't earmarked for emergencies involving other people. And then, for the first time since graduating college, I booked a vacation that didn't revolve around someone else's needs. I didn't go anywhere flashy or expensive. I found a secluded cabin in the mountains, quiet and self-contained, with a wood stove, big windows, and no cell service. I packed sweaters, wool socks, a few paperbacks, and my journal. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't owe anyone that. When I got there, the silence was so complete it made my ears ring for the first few hours. But it wasn't empty. It was rich. Full of pine-scented air, distant wind, the creak of floorboards, and the occasional groan of branches shifting in the cold. I hiked. I cooked simple meals. I sat by the fire wrapped in a blanket with no timeline, no obligations, and no weight on my chest. I didn't think about them, not because I was trying not to, but because I didn't need to anymore. The tension that had lived in my body for years, the hypervigilance, the expectation of crisis, it was gone. I existed in my own life, uninterrupted. 8 months passed. In that time, the silence continued. I stayed in therapy, made it a regular part of my routine. I took control of my finances and my time. I started rebuilding friendships that had faded while I was too busy being my family's unpaid emotional accountant. I went days, sometimes weeks, without thinking about them. I wasn't angry. I wasn't grieving. I just felt light. Then one morning, while I was checking my work inbox, I saw it. A message from an unfamiliar email address, but the name was unmistakable, my mother. She had found my professional contact through the company's public directory, one of the few channels I hadn't thought to block. The subject line was simple, my first name, nothing more. I opened it. It was long. Paragraph after paragraph, written in that carefully curated tone she used when she wanted to sound heartbroken but dignified. She spoke of family, of time lost, of how things had spiraled out of control. She said Emily was still not herself. She said Dad wasn't doing well and missed me. She mentioned how hard it was to be without me, how holidays were quieter now, how she prayed every day that I'd come back around. But there was one thing missing. She never said sorry. Not once. Not for the cruise. Not for the house. Not for the years of silence when I was hurting. Not for the debt, the guilt, the manipulation. Not even a vague apology like, "I'm sorry if you felt hurt." The letter was an attempt at a reset, no ownership, just a rewritten narrative where we were all equally at fault, where the past was complicated instead of clear-cut. It was transparent. It was manipulative. It was familiar. I read the email once, without emotion, then moved it straight to the trash. I didn't reply. I didn't save it for my records. I didn't give it a second thought. That message didn't belong to me. That guilt wasn't mine. That weight had never been mine to carry. And now, I wasn't carrying any of it. I wasn't answering to people who saw my value only in what I could provide. I wasn't tethered to a role I never agreed to play. I wasn't waiting for apologies that would never come. I wasn't explaining myself to people who had never once tried to understand me. I was living. I was healing. I was free.